The dust hadn't even settled from the stranger's boots when Jim Cortland knew trouble had arrived at his ranch. The man stood tall against the backdrop of the setting Montana sun, his expensive suit looking as out of place as a cactus in a cornfield. In his weathered hand, he clutched a check that fluttered in the evening breeze like a white flag of surrender. $50,000, the stranger announced, his voice carrying the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Cash, for the mare. Jim's calloused fingers tightened around the fence post as he watched his prized Appaloosa, Moonbeam, graze peacefully in the pasture. The mare's coat gleamed like polished copper in the fading light, her distinctive white spots creating a constellation across her powerful frame. She was more than a horse to Jim, she was family, a connection to his late father who had bred her bloodline for 3 generations. "She's not for sale," Jim replied, his voice as steady as the mountains that bordered his property. At 62, he had weathered enough storms to recognize when someone was trying to blow one his way. The stranger's smile faltered, revealing the first crack in his polished facade. "Perhaps you didn't hear me correctly. $50,000. That's more than most people make in 2 years. I heard you just fine, mister." Jim waited for a name that didn't come. "But Moonbeam stays put. She's carrying a foal, and I don't." Separate expectant mothers from their home. The man's eyes narrowed, studying Jim with the intensity of a hawk-eyeing prey. "You don't understand, Mr. Cortland. This isn't just any transaction. That mare is carrying my property." A cold wind swept across the ranch, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain and something else that made Jim's instincts prick like a startled cat. "Your property, son. I've got papers going back 15 years proving Moonbeam's lineage. Every horse on this ranch was born right here or bought with a proper bill of sale." The stranger reached into his jacket, producing a manila envelope thick with documents. "Moonbeam was artificially inseminated with sperm from my stallion, Thunderstrike. Without my consent, that foal is half mine by right of genetics, and I intend to claim what belongs to me." Jim felt the ground shift beneath his boots, though. He remained standing firm. The accusation hit him like a physical blow, not because it might be true, but because he couldn't immediately prove it wasn't. His veterinarian, Dr. Colleen Brewster, had handled Moonbeam's breeding, and Jim had trusted her expertise implicitly. "That's a mighty serious accusation," Jim said, his drawl thickening with tension. "You got proof of this supposed theft?" The stranger's smile returned, cold as January frost. "I have documentation that my prize stallion's genetic material was stolen from the Riverside Equine Center 3 months ago. The timing coincides perfectly with your mare's breeding cycle, unless you can prove otherwise. That foal is legally mine." As if sensing the tension crackling through the air, Moonbeam lifted her head and looked directly at the 2 men. Her dark eyes seemed to hold secrets, and Jim found himself wondering what truths lay hidden in the gentle curve of her belly. The rain began to fall, drop by drop, like tears from a darkening sky. Dr. Colleen Brewster arrived at sunrise, her veterinary truck kicking up gravel as she pulled into Jim's driveway. The stranger, who had finally introduced himself as Vincent Ashworth, owner of Ashworth Genetics, had left the night before with a promise to return with legal papers, but not before dropping one more bombshell that had kept Jim awake until dawn. "I know you didn't steal my stallion's genetics intentionally," Cortland, Ashworth had said, standing in the rain without seeming to notice the water streaming down his face. "But someone did, and they used your mare to cover their tracks. Find out who betrayed you, or I'll see you in court." Now, watching Colleen's familiar figure stride toward the barn, Jim felt the weight of 30 years of friendship pressing against the growing suspicion in his chest. Colleen had been the only one with access to arrange Moonbeam's breeding, the only one who could have orchestrated such a deception. "Morning, Jim," Colleen called out, her usually cheerful demeanor subdued. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd had as sleepless a night as he had. "I got your message. Figured we better talk before things get complicated." They found Moonbeam in her stall, contentedly munching hay, her sides noticeably rounded with the promise of new life. Jim ran his hand along her neck, drawing comfort from her warmth. As he prepared for a conversation that might change everything, "Colleen, I need you to be straight with me, Jim began, his voice carefully controlled. Yesterday, a man named Vincent Ashworth showed up claiming that Moonbeam's foal is his property. Says his stallion's genetics were stolen and used on my mare, Colleen's. Face went pale, and she sank onto a hay bale as if her legs could no longer support her. Oh, Jim, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. The admission hit Jim like a physical blow. So it's true, not the way he's telling it, Colleen said quickly, her hands trembling as she spoke. I didn't steal anything, Jim, but I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. She took a shuddering breath before continuing. 3 months ago, I was working at the Riverside Center, helping with their breeding program. There was a mix-up in the storage facility to samples got switched. I realized it immediately, but the Ashworth sample had already been used on Moonbeam, and your intended stallion's genetics had been used on one of Ashworth's mares. Jim felt the world tilt sideways. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was terrified. Colleen whispered, Ashworth genetics is worth millions, Jim. Vincent Ashworth could destroy my practice, my reputation, everything I've worked for. I thought maybe if I kept quiet, no one would ever know. But someone did know. Jim realized Ashworth knew about the theft because he was missing his sample. Colleen nodded miserably. When he discovered the theft, he started investigating. It was only a matter of time before he traced it back to the horses that were bred that day. Your Moonbeam was one of only 3 mares that received artificial insemination from the Riverside facility during the window when his sample went missing. Jim stared at his pregnant mare, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. Moonbeam was carrying a foal worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars a foal that Vincent Ashworth had every legal right to claim. There's something else, Colleen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ashworth's stallion, Thunderstrike, isn't just any horse. He's a champion racehorse with genetics worth more than most people's houses. If that foal inherits even half of his abilities, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Jim understood. This wasn't just about a simple mistake anymore. This was about a fortune in horseflesh growing in his mare's belly, and a powerful man who would stop at nothing to claim what he believed was rightfully his. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, Moonbeam turned her head toward Jim, her gentle eyes reflecting a trust that made his heart ache. Whatever happened next, he would protect her and her unborn foal, even if it cost him everything he'd built. The legal papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic. As he handed Jim the thick envelope, Vincent Ashworth wasn't wasting time. The documents demanded immediate DNA testing of both Moonbeam and her unborn foal, with provisions for Ashworth to claim ownership of the offspring if genetic testing proved his allegations. Jim sat on his porch that evening, the papers scattered across the weathered wooden table, when he noticed a figure approaching from the road. This time it wasn't Ashworth, but a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and work-worn hands that spoke of a lifetime around horses. Mr. Cortland, she called out, her voice carrying a slight tremor. My name is Delilah Rourke. I need to talk to you about your mare and Vincent Ashworth. Something in her tone made Jim set down his coffee and give her his full attention. Ma'am, if you're here on Ashworth's behalf, I'm not, she interrupted quickly. I'm here because I know the truth about what really happened, and it's not what Vincent is telling you. Delilah stepped into the circle of porch light, and Jim could see the exhaustion etched in her features. I used to work for Ashworth Genetics. I was his lead breeding specialist until 3 weeks ago when he fired me. What's that got to do with Moonbeam? Everything, Delilah said, pulling out a folder from her worn leather bag. Vincent didn't have his stallion's genetics stolen, Mr. Cortland. He sold them to me legally and with full documentation. Jim felt his pulse quicken. Explain. 6 months ago, Vincent's company was in serious financial trouble. He needed quick cash, so he started selling genetic samples from his prize stallions to private buyers. I purchased 3 samples from Thunderstrike for my own breeding program. I had dreams of starting my own stable. She opened the folder, revealing contracts, payment receipts, and shipping documents. But when Vincent's financial situation improved, he decided he wanted to undo the sales. He couldn't legally reclaim the samples, so he reported them as stolen and started tracking down where they'd been used. The implications hit Jim like a thunderbolt. So the sample used on Moonbeam was legally purchased by me and used with my full consent. Delilah finished. I hired Dr. Brewster to handle the insemination, but I never told her the genetics weren't for my own mares. When she had the mix-up at the facility, your mare ended up carrying my foal. As the hours passed, Jim and Delilah took turns monitoring Moonbeam, offering comfort and encouragement. The mare seemed to understand the importance of the moment, accepting their presence with unusual calm. "Jim," Delilah said quietly as they waited through the final stages of labor, "whatever happens with this foal, whatever the future brings, I want you to know that coming here was the best decision I've ever made." Before Jim could respond, Dr. Brewster called out softly, "Here we go. The foal's coming." In that moment, as they watched new life enter the world, Jim felt something shift in his understanding of family, legacy, and what it truly meant to build something lasting. The foal that emerged strong, healthy, and bearing the distinctive markings of both parents represented more than just a successful breeding. It represented hope, partnership, and the power of doing what was right even when it was difficult. As Moonbeam nuzzled her newborn foal, Jim placed a gentle hand on Delilah's shoulder. "Welcome to the family, partner." 6 months later, the Cortland Rourke Equine Center buzzed with activity as visitors from across the country came to see the remarkable foal that had become something of a legend in breeding circles. The colt, whom they had named Destiny's Thunder, possessed the perfect combination of his mother's gentle temperament and his father's magnificent conformation. Jim stood in the expanded office, reviewing applications from potential clients who wanted to breed their mares with their stallions. The irony wasn't lost on him. Vincent Ashworth's attempted fraud had inadvertently given them access to some of the finest bloodlines in the country. "Dispatch from the legal front," Delilah announced, entering with a broad smile and a thick envelope. Vincent's final appeal was denied. He'll serve the full 7 years, and the judge ordered him to pay additional restitution to all his victims. "How much are we talking about?" "Enough to fund the expansion we talked about, plus establish the scholarship program for young people interested in equine veterinary medicine." Delilah set down the envelope and moved to the window, watching Destiny's Thunder play in the pasture with his mother. "Sometimes I still can't believe how this all turned out." Jim joined her at the window, marveling at the transformation of his simple ranch into a thriving business. The new facilities were impressive modern stables, indoor training arenas, and veterinary facilities that attracted professionals from neighboring states. But more important than the buildings was the sense of purpose that permeated everything they did. "Dr. Brennan called this morning," Delilah continued, referring to their newest associate veterinarian. "The DNA analysis on Destiny's Thunder came back. His genetic profile shows markers that suggest he could be one of the fastest horses of his generation. Racing prospects beyond anything we imagined. But more importantly, his breeding value is almost incalculable. We're looking at founding a bloodline that could influence the industry for decades." A commotion in the yard drew their attention. A group of high school students from the local agricultural program had arrived for their weekly volunteer session, part of the outreach program Delilah had established. Jim watched as she immediately headed outside to greet them, her natural teaching ability evident in how the young people responded to her guidance. This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of their partnership. The knowledge they were passing on was reaching the next generation. 3 of their student volunteers had already declared their intention to pursue veterinary degrees, inspired by what they'd learned at the center. "Mr. Cortland," a familiar voice called from the entrance. Dr. Colleen Brewster approached, carrying a tablet and wearing the satisfied expression of someone bearing good news. "I just received the blood work results on Moonbeam. She's pregnant again." Jim felt his pulse quicken. "Are you certain?" "Confirmed this morning. And this time, we know exactly which stallion is the father, our own Destiny's Thunder. Moonbeam will be carrying her own son's offspring." The implications were staggering. A mare breeding with her own son wasn't unheard of in horse breeding. But given Destiny's Thunder's remarkable genetics, The resulting foal could possess an incredibly concentrated dose of championship bloodlines. There's something else, Dr. Brewster continued. I received a call from the Kentucky Horse Racing Association. They want to feature our program in their national magazine. The story of how Vincent Ashworth's fraud attempt led to the creation of one of the most promising breeding programs in the country. Jim nodded, but his attention was drawn back to the pasture where Delilah worked with the students, teaching them how to read a horse's body language and understand the subtle signs of health and contentment. Destiny's Thunder had wandered over to investigate the newcomers, his natural curiosity and gentle nature evident in every movement. You know what the best part is? Jim said to Dr. Brewster, who had followed his gaze. None of this was about the money or the prestige. It was about doing right by the horses and the people who love them. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch, Jim reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. What had started as a simple refusal to sell his mare had evolved into something far greater, a legacy that would outlast him, a partnership built on integrity, and a testament to the idea that sometimes the most valuable things in life come from making the hardest choices. In the distance, Moonbeam whinnied softly to her son, and Jim smiled, knowing that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written. 2 years had passed since that fateful day, when Vincent Ashworth first set foot on Jim's ranch, and the autumn morning painted the Montana landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Jim stood at the fence of the main pasture, watching a scene that filled him with profound satisfaction. Moonbeam grazed peacefully alongside her two offspring, Destiny's Thunder, now a magnificent 3-year-old stallion, and her youngest, a filly they had named Promise Keeper. The genetic testing had confirmed what Jim had suspected. Promise Keeper possessed an even more remarkable combination of traits than her older brother, with the potential to become one of the greatest mares in breeding history. The delegation from Japan arrives this afternoon, Delilah announced, approaching with their newest partner, Dr. Marcus Webb, a renowned geneticist who had joined their operation 6 months earlier. They're particularly interested in establishing a breeding exchange program. Jim nodded, still marveling at how their small Montana ranch had become an international destination for equine breeding. The Cortland Rourke Equine Center now housed 47 horses, employed 12 people, and had generated breeding contracts worth millions of dollars. But more importantly, they had maintained their commitment to ethical practices and education. Any word from the university? Jim asked, referring to their latest project, a partnership with Montana State University to establish a satellite campus focused on equine science. Approved unanimously by the Board of Trustees, Dr. Webb replied, with a grin. Construction begins next spring. We'll be able to offer full degree programs within 3 years. As they talked, a familiar figure approached from the direction of the main house. Agent Patricia Moss, now retired from the FBI, had accepted their offer to head security and investigation services for high-value horse transactions, a growing field, given the increasing sophistication of equine fraud. Jim, you'll want to see this, she said, holding up a newspaper. The headline read, Former Equine Genetics Executive Dies in Prison. Jim took the paper and read the brief article about Vincent Ashworth's death from a heart attack while serving his sentence. He felt no satisfaction at the news, only a quiet sense of closure. He never did understand, Jim said softly, that the real value wasn't in owning the horses, it was in serving them. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention to the main road. A convoy of trucks and trailers was arriving. The Japanese delegation, along with representatives from breeding operations in Ireland, Australia, and Kentucky. The Cortland Rourke Center had become the hub of an international network dedicated to preserving and improving bloodlines while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Are you ready for this? Delilah asked, adjusting her jacket as they prepared to greet their visitors. Jim looked around at everything they had built, the state-of-the-art facilities, the thriving horses, the dedicated staff, the students who came from around the world to learn. But his gaze ultimately returned to Moonbeam, who had started it all with her gentle trust and unwavering spirit. More than ready, he replied. This is what we were meant to do. As the international visitors began touring the facility, marveling At the horses and the innovative programs, Jim found himself thinking about legacy, not just the bloodlines they were preserving, but the values they were passing on. Every horse that left their ranch carried with it a commitment to excellence, integrity, and the understanding that true success came from serving something greater than oneself. That evening, after the visitors had been settled into their accommodations, and the day's formal presentations had concluded, Jim and Delilah sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over their expanded domain. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Vincent had simply offered to buy Moonbeam? Honestly, from the beginning, Delilah asked. Jim stared at the documents, his mind racing. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Delilah's shoulders sagged. Because I was scared. Vincent is powerful, and when he fired me, he threatened to destroy my reputation if I ever spoke against him. But when I heard he was going after an innocent rancher, trying to steal a mare and her foal, I couldn't stay silent anymore. What proof do you have that he's lying about the theft? Delilah smiled grimly and pulled out her phone. Vincent made a crucial mistake. He's been so focused on claiming that foal that he forgot I still have friends. At his company, someone sent me this yesterday. She played a recording, and Vincent Ashworth's voice filled the evening air. I don't care what the contracts say. Harrison, that sample should never have been sold. If I can prove it was stolen instead of purchased, I can claim those foals and recoup my losses. The old rancher in Montana won't know what hit him. Jim felt anger surge through his veins. Hot and righteous. He's been planning this from the beginning. Worse than that, Delilah said. He's done this before, at least 3 other times in the past year, targeting small ranchers who can't afford to fight him in court. He uses his resources to intimidate them into surrendering valuable foals. The sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the night air. Vincent Ashworth's black SUV pulled into the driveway, its headlights sweeping across the porch like searchlights. Looks like we're about to have a confrontation, Jim murmured, standing to face whatever came next. As Vincent stepped out of his vehicle, his confident stride faltered when he saw Delilah standing beside Jim. For the first time since Jim had met him, Vincent Ashworth looked genuinely surprised and worried. Well, Vincent said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger as he approached the porch. If it isn't my former employee, spreading lies about her ex-boss. Delilah stood her ground, though Jim could see her hands trembling slightly. The only lies being told here are yours, Vincent. Mr. Cortland, show him the contracts. Vincent's eyes darted to the papers scattered across the table, and Jim saw something flicker across his face, not surprise, but calculation. Those documents are forgeries, Cortland. Delilah was fired for theft and falsifying breeding records. Anything she's told you is an attempt to cover her own crimes. Funny thing about that, Jim said, settling back into his chair with deliberate calm. I recorded our conversation, including the part where you admitted to lying about the theft to claim valuable foals. The color drained from Vincent's face. You're bluffing. Delilah held up her phone, and Vincent's own voice echoed across. The old rancher in Montana won't know what hit him. For a moment, the only sound was the evening wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. Vincent stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade crumbling like a house of cards in a storm. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Vincent finally said, his voice low and dangerous. I have lawyers, resources, connections. I can bury both of you so deep. Actually, a new voice interrupted from the darkness. You're the one who's buried. A figure stepped into the circle of porch light, a woman in her 50s, wearing a badge and the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. Agent Patricia Moss, FBI. Mr. Ashworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and extortion. Vincent's mouth fell open. FBI, this is about a horse. This is about a pattern of criminal behavior involving fraudulent insurance claims, stolen genetic material, and systematically defrauding small ranchers across 5 states. Agent Moss replied crisply, we've been building a case against you for 8 months. Jim felt the pieces clicking into place. The other ranchers Delilah mentioned filed complaints with local law enforcement, which eventually made their way to us. Agent Moss confirmed, when Ms. Rourke contacted our field office yesterday with evidence of your latest scheme. We decided it was time to close the net. Vincent looked around desperately, like a cornered animal seeking escape. You can't prove anything. It's my word against theirs. Agent Moss smiled coldly. Actually, we have recordings, financial records, testimony from 7 victims, and evidence of genetic material fraud across multiple states. Your own phone records show you've been coordinating these schemes for over 2 years. As 2 more agents emerged from the shadows to place Vincent in handcuffs, he turned to Jim with venom in his eyes. This isn't over, Cortland. That foal is still worth a fortune, and there are others who want to claim it. Actually, Delilah said quietly, there won't be any claims on the foal. Everyone turned to look at her, and she managed a small smile. I'm gifting my legal ownership of the genetic material to Mr. Cortland. The foal belongs with its mother, where it was always meant to be. Jim stared at her in disbelief. Ma'am, that foal could be worth more than money can measure in the right hands, Delilah finished. You've protected Moonbeam when you didn't have to. You've shown more integrity in 3 days than Vincent showed in 3 years. The foal will be safe with you. As Vincent was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence, Jim felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. But looking at Delilah's resigned expression, he realized her sacrifice had cost her more than she was letting on. Ms. Rourke, he said carefully, what will you do now? You gave up your dreams for my mare. Delilah looked out toward the pasture where Moonbeam grazed peacefully under the stars. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing to do. Mr. Cortland, I'll figure something out. Jim studied her face in the porch light, seeing something there that reminded him of his own determination to protect what mattered most. An idea began to form in his mind, one that might give them both what they truly needed. 3 weeks after Vincent Ashworth's arrest, Jim found himself sitting across from Delilah at his kitchen table, reviewing architectural plans that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating sketches of expanded stables, breeding facilities, and training grounds. I still can't believe you're serious about this, Delilah said, tracing her finger along the blueprint of a state-of-the-art veterinary facility. Jim, this is going to cost you a fortune. Money I wouldn't have if you hadn't come forward. Jim replied, pouring fresh coffee into her mug. Besides, it makes good business sense. You've got the expertise. I've got the land and the foundation. Stock. Together, we can build something special. The partnership had evolved naturally over the past weeks. After Vincent's arrest, Delilah had nowhere to go. Her reputation had been damaged by her association with Ashworth Genetics, and other facilities were reluctant to hire someone involved in such a high-profile case. Jim, meanwhile, found himself sitting on a potential gold mine with Moonbeam's foal, but lacking the specialized knowledge to develop a proper breeding program. The insurance settlement from Ashworth's fraud case should cover most of the construction costs. Jim continued, and Dr. Brewster has agreed to relocate her practice here permanently. We'll have everything we need to do this right. Delilah set down her coffee and looked out toward the pasture where Moonbeam grazed, her sides now prominently rounded with pregnancy. She's due in about 6 weeks. Have you thought about what you'll name the foal, actually? I was hoping you'd help with that, Jim said. Seems like the person who owns half the business should have a say in naming our first official offspring. Half the business. Delilah's eyes widened. Jim, I can't afford to buy into a partnership of this magnitude. Who said anything about buying? Jim pulled out a legal document from his jacket. Your expertise, your sacrifice to do the right thing, your knowledge of bloodlines and breeding, that's your investment. I need a partner, not an employee. Delilah stared at the partnership agreement, her hands trembling slightly as she read. The terms, this is too generous. You're giving me equal ownership of everything we build going forward. Nothing generous about it. Jim said firmly, I'm 62 years old, and I don't have children to leave this ranch to. But I do have a chance to build something that'll outlast both of us. Something that'll honor the horses we love and the land that's been in my family for 3 generations. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Brewster entered, her face flushed with excitement. "Jim, Delilah, you need to come see this." Moonbeam showing signs of early labor. They rushed to the barn, where Moonbeam paced restlessly in her stall, her breathing shallow and rapid. Jim had assisted with dozens of births over the years, but this one felt different, more significant. Carrying the weight of all their hopes and dreams. "It's too early," Delilah whispered, her professional training warring with her emotional investment. "She's not due for another 6 weeks. Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them," Dr. Brewster said calmly, preparing her equipment. "Let's see what this little one has to say about timing." Jim considered the question, then shook his head. Wouldn't have mattered. Some things aren't for sale at any price. Moonbeam belonged here, with her family, raising her foals in the place where she was born. All Vincent's scheming and lying couldn't change that fundamental truth. In the pasture, Destiny's thunder nickered softly to his younger sister, while Moonbeam kept watchful guard over both of them. 3 generations of excellence, each building on the foundation of love, care, and ethical treatment that had defined Jim's approach to ranching his entire life. "You know what the best part is," Jim said, echoing words he had spoken years earlier, but with deeper meaning now. Vincent thought he was fighting for a prize worth thousands of dollars. What he never understood was that we were protecting something priceless. As the stars began to appear in the Montana sky, Jim Cortland felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived, a legacy properly established, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important victories are won not by taking what you want, but by protecting what you love. The horses grazed peacefully in the gathering darkness, secure in the knowledge that they were home.